Magic, White and Black, the Science of Finite and Infinite Life. Instances are known in which persons have been driven to unalive their self, hoping thereby to escape these persecuting demons. Such demons are said to have in some cases taken even a tangible form. But whether tangible or intangible, the substance of which they are formed is merely a projection of substance of the person to whom they thus appear. They are, so to say, that person himself, and if the latter could injure or kill such a ghost, he would merely thereby injure or kill his own body. Every thought of man upon being evolved passes into another world and becomes an active entity by associating itself, coalescing we might term it, with an elemental, that is to say, with one of the semi-intelligent forces of the kingdoms. It survives as an active intelligence, a creature of the mind's begetting, for a longer or shorter period, proportionate with the original intensity of the cerebral action which generated it. Thus, a good thought is perpetuated as an active, beneficent power, an evil one as a maleficent demon. And so man is continually peopling his current in space with the offspring of his fancies, desires, impulses, and passions. A current which reacts upon any sensitive or nervous organization which comes in contact with it in proportion to its dynamic intensity. The adept evolves these shapes consciously, other men throw them off unconsciously. This testimony is corroborated by one coming from another source, and proving that to create subjective forms, it is not necessary to give a distinct shape to our thoughts by the power of imagination, but that each state of feeling or sentiment may find expression in subjective forms, whether or not we may be conscious of their existence. A form is a state of mind, and a sentiment is a state of mind. A sentiment expressed will be represented by a corresponding form. Mr. Whitworth's clairvoyant experiences were, well, quite extraordinary. Whitworth, a clairvoyant, describes how in his youth, while seeing a German professor perform on an organ, he noticed a host of appearances moving about the keyboard. Veritable Lilliputian sprites, fairies and gnomes, astonishingly minute in size, yet as perfect in form and features as any of the larger people in the room. He described them as being divided into sexes and clothed in a most fantastic manner. In form, appearance, and movement, they were in perfect accord with the theme. In the quick measures, how madly they danced, waving their plumed hats and fans in very ecstasy, and darting to and fro in inconceivable rapidity, with feet beating time in rain-like patter of a chord. Quick as a flash, when the music changed to the solemn cadence of a march for the dead, the airy things vanished, and in their place came black-robed gnomes, dressed like cowled monks, sour-faced Puritans, or mutes in the black garb of a funeral procession. Strangest of all, on every tiny face was expressed the sentiment of the music, so that I could instantly understand the thought and feeling that was intended to be conveyed. In a wild burst of sounding grief came a rush of mothers, tear-eyed and with disheveled hair, beating their breasts and wailing pious lamentations over their dead loved ones. These would be followed by plumed knights with shield and spear, and host of fiery troops, mounted or foot, red-handed in the fiery strife of bloody battle, as the clang of martial music came leaping from the keyboard. And ever, as each change brought its new set of sprites, the old ones would vanish into the air as suddenly as they had come. Whenever a discord was struck, the tiny sprite that appeared was some misshapen creature, with limbs and dress awry, usually a humpbacked dwarf, whose voice was guttural and rasping, and his every movement ungainly and disagreeable. He then describes how in his riper age he saw such fairy-like beings coming from the lips of persons talking, and which seemed in every action the very counterpart of the feeling conveyed in the uttered speech. If the words were inspired by good sentiments, these figures were transcendently beautiful. Bad sentiments produced horrid-looking creatures. Hate was expressed by hissing snakes and dark, fiery devils. Treacherous words produced figures beautiful in front and disgusting and horrid behind, while love produced forms silvery white and full of beauty and harmony. On one never-to-be-forgotten occasion, I was a pained witness to a scene of living faithfulness on one side and a double-faced, treacherous duplicity on the other. A fair young girl and her departing lover had met to exchange greetings ere he went on a distant journey. Each word of hers gave forth beautiful, radiant fairies. But while the front half of each that was turned to the girl was equally fair to look upon, and smiled with all the radiant seeming of undying affection, the rear half of each was black and devilish, with fiery snakes and red-forked tongues protruding from their cruel lips, as gleams of wicked cunning danced in sneaking sidelong glances from the corners of the half-closed eyes. These dark backgrounds of the little figures were horrible to look at, ever shifting, dodging, and seeming to shut up within themselves, as they sought to keep only bright and honest toward the trusting girl and hold the black deception out of sight. And it was noticeable that while a halo of cloudless radiance surrounded the good outside seeming, a pall of thick vapor hung like a canopy of unbroken gloom above the other. It would be absurd to suppose that these forms had any objective existence outside of the mind of the man who observed them. They were the creations of the involuntary action of his mind, and represented the various mental states which were produced in quick succession by the impressions his mind received. But they furnish a good illustration to the theory that each form expresses a certain character, and that each mental state corresponds to a certain form in which it may find its expression. The above description coincides with what has been described by others, and proves that thoughts and sentiments are something substantial residing in the imagination of man, and which may affect his inner world for good or for evil, and that the necessity of controlling thoughts and desires is not a matter of little importance, but has a practical use. Before the pure light of reason, all illusions will disappear in the end, and the truth appear, not hidden in forms, but in the sublime splendor of its purity, before the wondering gaze of spiritually awakened man. But although subjective forms are manifestations of life, they have no appropriate active will of their own, They are the creations of the thought of man acting upon the akasa. They are only kept alive by the life power that radiates into them from the life center in man. They are like shadows, vanishing when the fountain of light from which they drink is exhausted. When the psychical action of man that gave them life ceases to act or acts in another direction, they will disappear sooner or later. However, as the corpse of a man does not dissolve immediately as soon as the principle of life has departed, but decays slowly or rapidly according to their molecular density and cohesion, likewise the astral forms created by the desires of man may require a considerable time for their dissolution according to the amount of will fire made active in them. They continue to exist as long as man infuses life and consciousness into them by his thought and his will, and if they have once gained a certain amount of power, they may still cling to him, although he may not desire their companionship. They depend on him for their life, and the struggle for existence forces them to remain with the source from which they draw their vitality. If they depart from that fountain, they die. They are therefore forced to remain. And like the phantom created by Frankenstein, they persecute their creators with their unwelcome presence. To rid oneself of such a presence, he who is persecuted should direct the full power of his aspirations and thoughts into another and higher direction, and thereby starve them to death. In this way, the spiritual principle of every man becomes his special redeemer, who by the transformation of character saves him from the effects of his sin, and before whose pure light the illusions created by the lower attractions will melt like the snow under the influence of the sun.